All right, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar from EcoTree. Can you hear me well? I guess so. Looks good. So yes, thank you very much. And welcome to this webinar, how to contribute to carbon sinks and biodiversity without greenwashing. So this is the third episode of our international series of 60 minutes webinar. As usual, this format is having in-house and external experts, trying to find the right balance between the for dummies talks and the two academic talks. And our ambition, like with the previous editions, is not necessarily to give you all the answers, but rather to help you ask yourself the right questions so you by yourself can find the right answers. And ultimately, we want to help you, take decision, move forward in this crucial field of sustainability. So today, we're going to deep dive into a topic that is on many lips, greenwashing. Whether you want to avoid it or whether you want to condemn it. Either way, there's a lot entailed in this concept of greenwashing. And yeah, it's worth knowing what you're talking about. So, because quite often, actually, even with the best intention in the world, you may hit quite severe criticism when it comes to your climate actions, to a point even where it may freeze people and organizations in doing anything, right? Because they're so afraid of being accused of greenwashing. So to help us demystify this today, we have the pleasure to have two speakers. Louisiane Gezel, she's the head of innovation and impact at EcoTree. And our external guest today, Mikkel Lotsveld, who's head of sustainability at Gil Meiden Kiese. And with their help, we'll start from a sort of helicopter view, looking into how and where to actually start on the right foot, so to speak, a sustainability journey. And to then better zoom in with some guidance on the choices of climate actions, and definitely to end up more specifically on the critical communication aspects around greenwashing and avoiding greenwashing. A few practicalities and then I'm done. This session is recorded, so you'll get an email from us after the session with a link for an access to the replay and a few additional sources. And we'll try to give some room if the speakers stick to the schedule for question and answers. So no need to interrupt or raise your hand during the presentation. You just drop your question in the dedicated Q&A section of this call, and our team will curate them. So yeah, that's it. I've spoken well enough. Louisiane, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So I'm Louisiane, and I'm the head of innovation and impact working in EcoTree. And just in a few words, what we do in EcoTree is restore and protect ecosystems, natural ecosystems, and especially forests. And we do that in Europe, mainly in France, but also in Denmark, UK, etc., etc. And we do that for two reasons: fight climate change and fight biodiversity loss. And so thanks to the contribution of companies and individuals, we do this restoration of ecosystems. And companies, when they contribute to the ecosystem restoration, gain carbon credits or can become a sponsor of biodiversity projects that can be wetland restoration or ponds or projects about pollination. They can contribute to biodiversity funds as well. Anyway, we have many offers for the companies that contribute to our project and to fight climate change and biodiversity loss. So this was just in a few words what we do. And I'll start with explaining why we need now to contribute to carbon sinks and to biodiversity and more globally to become a regenerative company, so that we can then dive to, okay, now that I understood this, how do I avoid greenwashing? Because it's often that when you contribute to carbon sinks or to biodiversity projects, you may have greenwashing issues. So but actually it's wrong, and you have to know the tips to avoid it. And this is what we're going to give you today. So firstly, to understand why CSR is no longer nice to have, but a must have, you need to understand that at the beginning, you have conventional, which is business as usual companies. Then companies going a bit further might be the companies that are sustainable and that lower the negative impact on ecosystems. And they also try to be compliant to the CSR regulation. These are the companies that take into account CSR, especially the sustainable companies, and they take into account CSR and they try to integrate it within their strategies. Before it was a nice to have, and now it's more like a must have, and it's not something you're going to use to be competitive. It is something you need to have. What is going to be competitive, however, is trying to be contributive or even more regenerative. So a company being contributive is a company that restores the ecosystems, and especially the defective ecosystems, and that tries to go beyond legal aspects and tries to be not only compliant, but go beyond that. And companies being regenerative are the ones that are going to have a real net improvement of the entire ecosystems, and that also try to transform their business model to be regenerative and to restore the ecosystems. So now, because of the market, you need to go beyond only reducing your impact, but also trying to restore the ecosystems. And this is a market question, but it's not only that. It's also because of scientific aspects. So through this scheme that's a bit scary, actually, you need to understand that climate change is due to two things: the emissions we emit. This is linked mainly to fossil fuel combustion, but also to deforestation. About 90% is due to fossil fuel combustion. And so you have the emissions we emit, and then you also have the emissions that are not sequestered by carbon sinks. These are everything linked to biosphere and especially forests, but also the ocean. And climate change is the combination of this, what we emit and what is not stored by carbon sinks. So when we look at this, we understand that a company that wants to have a real climate strategy needs to reduce its emissions, but also contribute to carbon sinks. It's the same with biodiversity loss. We won't go really deep into biodiversity aspects. If you want to learn more, we have many info on our website on this. But basically, what you need to understand is that all the companies have pressures on biodiversity. There are 5 types of biodiversity pressures that are linked to habitat loss, climate change, pollution, invasive species, and overexploitation of species or resources. So companies need to reduce these pressures, but in the same time, they also need to restore biodiversity. Why is that? Because actually they use a lot of ecosystem services. So the services that are given by nature for their business. To give you an example, your supply chain is probably linked with biodiversity. You might use wood. Your employees, of course, eat during lunchtime, and this is absolutely impossible without pollinators. So there are many examples. Also, the tourism industry is really linked to biodiversity. And so whether it's your company itself or your suppliers or your clients, you, of course, depend on biodiversity. So now the figure that have been done, that the scientists have found, is that 55% of global GDP relies on the ecosystem services of nature. So it's just a figure so that you can understand how it's important to reduce your pressure, but also restore the biodiversity, as you can restore also carbon sinks. So now that you understand, okay, I need to restore ecosystems as well as reducing my impacts, you probably wonder, okay, how should I do this? So you have two, in terms of environmental aspects, you have two possibilities. You can contribute to carbon sinks, and this is most of the time through carbon credits. The carbon credits are certificates that tell you that you have stored, you have sequestered, or you have avoided 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. So it's just a certificate, but above carbon credits, you have real projects happening, of course. So you can contribute to this, or you can help to preserve or restore biodiversity. And now most of the companies doing this sometimes are scared, and they're right to be scared to do greenwashing when they contribute to carbon sinks or biodiversity, and especially to carbon credits, because there's been too many issues on the subject, especially these last months, because of projects that were badly selected by companies, or because of the projects that were not really linked to the CSR strategy of the company. So it made a mess, and it was not really coherent. And so this was the reason why they were greenwashing. So now I'll help you to understand how you can choose the project that fits your company or your carbon footprint, so that you can choose the right project. And then we'll speak about communication, because to avoid greenwashing, you need to do the 2 of these. You need to choose the right projects, and you need also to communicate in a sustainable way and in a very coherent and trustful way. So when you want to contribute to carbon sinks or biodiversity projects because you want to be a regenerative company, you need to, what we advise actually, is to ask yourself these 4 questions. Which ecosystem should I finance and where? According to my company as well. How this project is integrated in the strategy of my company. When should I finance it, and in which quantity? And what is the quality of the project that I'm going to finance? So now we're going to deep dive into these questions for carbon projects, carbon sinks projects, and biodiversity projects. So if you want to contribute to carbon sinks and do carbon contribution, because you understood that you need to reduce your impact, but also contribute to carbon sinks, then you need to ask yourself, okay, how is it integrated, when I should finance it, and in which quantity, and how is it linked to a strategy? So for this, we use here the example of the SBTI, which is the International Science-Based Targets Initiative. So it's an initiative that helps the company to set targets that are coherent and that are compliant to the Paris agreements, so that the targets to reduce the impact of the company and the climate targets are very coherent with the Paris Agreement. So to limit climate change to plus 1.5 or plus 2 degrees compared to the end of the 19th century. And so what says the SBTI is that you need to reduce your impact, and especially to reduce by 90% to 2050. So to reduce your emission by 90%. When you say this, when you understand this, you understand also that, of course, even if you succeed to reduce by 90%, you will have 10% emission that remain. So what says the SBTI is that you should compensate these emissions and through carbon credits that are based on sequestration. So carbon credits that are linked with projects that sequester carbon. What says also the SBTI is that if you want to go beyond these 10% of emissions, then you can, but it won't be compensation, it would be just contribution. So it would be the contribution of your company to carbon sinks, to global carbon neutrality. So this is what the SBTI says. And so you have to consider also, are you trying to achieve carbon neutrality or net zero? So what we advise you is to target more net zero strategies. Why is that? So just so that you understand, carbon neutrality compared to net zero, what's the difference? Carbon neutrality is actually not really reducing your emission. It's just you consider that your company won't have to reduce the emission, but could compensate the whole emission it has. And it can be through any type of carbon credits, and especially to avoiding credits. So you can notice here that there are two types of carbon credits. The carbon credits that are linked with avoidance. So it's, for example, a carbon credit that is linked to a project that does not really sequester carbon, but that avoids to emit an emission. I will show you some example, but you have carbon credits that are based on wind energy, and it avoids carbon emissions. This is for carbon neutrality. So carbon neutrality is you don't really need to reduce your emission, but you're going to compensate the whole of your emissions with any type of credits that might be avoiding or sequestered. Net zero, however, is you reduce your impact, and on the emissions that are going to remain, you compensate the emission with carbon credits that are based on sequestration. So this is what we think better. Anyway, any type of strategy you choose, you need also to know that it's not really appreciated by people to speak about your carbon neutrality. You should more say that you contribute to global neutrality, but your company won't never be carbon neutral. So once that you ask yourself, okay, how much should I finance? So 10% or more, is it linked to net zero or carbon neutrality strategy? You ask yourself, okay, I want to contribute to sequestration credits, and it would compensate 10% of my emissions, for example. So which ecosystem should I choose? You have two types. You have projects, and especially carbon credits that are based on nature-based or that are based on technology-based solutions. Nature-based is using nature. It's, for example, afforestation, reforestation, it's soil carbon sequestration, it's wetlands, it's using nature, trying to protect nature. And of course, it has a lot of co-benefits on biodiversity. This is a possibility. The other possibility is to use tech-based solutions. So this would be, for example, direct air capture, which is a technological solution that sequesters carbon that is already in the air, and it's great because it sequesters very fast. However, it has no co-benefits, and it needs a lot of research and development investments. It's quite costly, and it's quite often also that it uses a lot of material that are quite rare, but it's a possibility as well. You have the two possibilities. You probably wonder also, where should I finance a project? You have many possibilities. Again, most of the projects are based in Asia, and in Latin America you have a lot as well. Our advice is to try to have projects that are very close to your impact and to your headquarters as well. So if you are based in Europe, try to have some projects that are based in Europe. You can also have some projects that you would finance in Asia or in many, many other places, because they also need some projects over there. However, try to mix and match or to focus on Europe, because this is the closest to your value chain. So you avoid more greenwashing when you try to finance projects that are close to your value chain. So this was about carbon contribution and carbon sinks. If you want to contribute to biodiversity, it's actually the same questions. So I won't deep dive into everything, but same, ask yourself, which ecosystem should I finance and where? So you can choose to contribute to a fund, a biodiversity fund. I showed you the French, you can notice here the French biodiversity fund, but there is one also in Denmark. And this is a fund that we've created in EcoTree and that hosts a lot of biodiversity projects in the area. You can do this, or you can choose to select a specific project that can be pollination, wetland, agroforestry, habitats, marine ecosystems, etc. It depends. If you want to invest in a biodiversity fund, it's easier for you to communicate afterwards. And it's choosing also to contribute to many projects, so it's wider. However, if you want something that is very close to your impact and that is maybe closer to your value chain, sometimes it's more interesting to contribute to wetland, for example, if you have a water strategy, or to pollination if you really depend on pollination because you are an industry working in food, for example. So these are the questions you need to ask yourself when you choose a biodiversity project. I won't really develop on this slide. However, just an example, we've been working with ERAM, which is a shoes company. And just so that you understand, basically, ERAM has signed the Fashion Pact, which includes biodiversity restoration. So they wanted to have an impact on biodiversity restoration. And they also had, in the same time, some actions that they've implemented to reduce their biodiversity impact. And they know that they use a lot of water, and they wanted to have a water strategy. So this was the context. In the same time, they decided to contribute with us to wetland restoration because it actually had a lot of sense with their water strategy going on. So we chose a wetland area that was close to their headquarters, and they restored 4.5 hectares of wetland with us. And of course, we did all the inventory, all the monitoring, including flora, amphibian, odonates, etc. And they have a lot of KPIs that they use on this. So now they have an impact on reducing their impact on biodiversity, and especially on water, and in the same time, saving wetlands that we actually need to save a lot, because 80% of the wetlands are threatened. And we absolutely need this because it helps to save water. So in the context, they wanted to contribute to wetland restoration. Concerning when you should finance and in which quantity when you finance biodiversity, there's no international agreement like we had for SBTI. So there is no real recommendations today because the biodiversity subject is a bit new compared to carbon issues. However, concerning the timing, what we see and what we understand with scientists is that biodiversity loss is happening so fast. You have some figures here. We've lost 69% of vertebrate animals in the last 50 years. So we are living a sixth mass extinction. So everything is going very fast, and we need to restore biodiversity as quickly as possible. So we believe that you should not wait to have reduced your biodiversity impact or your carbon, your CO2 equivalent impact before contributing to restoration, because otherwise we are all going to wait until 2050 and biodiversity will have collapsed so much. So the recommendation of us and of scientists are more like to restore as quickly as possible, and in the same time to reduce our impact on biodiversity and on climate change. Last topic, so both for contribution on carbon sinks and on biodiversity, ask yourself what is the project quality. So especially on carbon, ask yourself, okay, are the carbon credits linked to monoculture and very high forestry production, or is it more sustainably managed? And we really encourage you to choose sustainably managed carbon credits. It's really important, and it's going to avoid you a lot of greenwashing. And also, to make sure that your project has a lot of quality, make sure that you have some KPIs in the long term. Here are a few examples of KPIs that we give to our clients in the long term, and I think it's absolutely essential for you to have some KPIs, and it's also a way to avoid greenwashing. Also, make sure who you are speaking to. EcoTree is a project developer, but there are many companies selling carbon credits that are not project developers, that are just brokers, retailers, or intermediaries. And so just make sure that you are speaking to a project developer, because it's probably going to help you to avoid greenwashing. However, we have some competitors that are not project developers and that are working very well, but just make sure when you speak to someone that is not project developer, how you can make sure that the project really has a lot of quality. So these were the few questions that you need to ask yourself, and I'll let the floor to Mikkel to give you a few info on communicating sustainably. So you can share your screen.
Thank you, Lucienne. I'll give it a try. Here we go. Right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Good. Thanks, Lucienne, and thanks to the EcoTree team for letting me speak today on this topic, in which I spend, I think, 90% of my professional time, that is communicating about sustainability in a sustainable way. So just a few words on me and the company I work for. My name is Mikkel. I'm head of sustainability and a senior client director with Gilmite & Kiese, which is a Nordic strategic communications agency, with more than 30 years in the line of work. And I've worked there for roughly 9 years and advised clients on sustainability related communications, clients such as Novo Nordisk and Moderna and Google and others, and previously did that in a role with the Lego Group. So I've been around the block in terms of sustainability communication, working with everything from green transition, biodiversity, circularity, materials, etc., etc. So yeah, just a few words. Gilmite & Kiese, just said it. Around 150 advisors and consultants in the company, working out of Copenhagen, where I'm based, and Oslo and Stockholm as well. So that's enough poster boring for me. So the EcoTree team asked me, before I crack on with the topic sustainability communication. Now, since that we are talking about greenwashing today, one thing that is hard to overlook is the new EU Green Claims Directive. So I'll just ask to give a brief overview of what's in it, and caveat, and please bear in mind that I'm not a trained lawyer, so this is just my brief overview, and then I'll happily put you in contact with our legal partners who can speak more on the subject. But in overall terms, the EU Green Claims Directive, which is a directive that has recently been put forward by the Commission, is a new directive aimed at preventing false or misleading environmental claims made by companies, covering the EU market, of course. So the basic thing that the Commission wants to do here is to make sure that all green claims are reliable, comparable, and verifiable across all member states, in essence, to promote genuine sustainable practices. In essence, it's a greenwashing ban, I guess you could say. So four main headlines that I'd like to just mention to you here. One is documentation, and please bear in mind, this is not law yet. It's still undergoing all the trilogues and all that sort of stuff that needs to happen in Brussels. But what has been put forward is documentation. It's a quite heavy documentation burden. So the EU wants to require all companies to make comprehensive records of environmental information, how you get there, quite extensive LCA. So you can't just make a claim without documenting. You can't just say that that you are carbon neutral. Well, you probably shouldn't say that you're carbon neutral, but you shouldn't say that you're net zero without having documentation for how to get there, or that you are in fact net zero today. Now, verification, I think, is a very interesting one as well, because as it is today, the EU would require companies to have third-party verification of the green claims that they make to ensure this kind of credibility. And this is, of course, a golden opportunity for auditors and the Big Four, but I don't think that it will go through as is here, because it's a very, very big burden on companies. Transparency is in the sense that the Commission essentially wants more transparency from companies, that they openly share how their green claims are substantiated, and they sort of show the methodology by which they calculate the footprint, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, labels, which is also a very, very interesting movement from the EU, who essentially wants to create a standardized label register across the whole EU. So gone are the days with your own bespoke leaf green label that you could put on your product and say, this is eco-friendly or whatever. So here the EU wants to standardize that totally, and for essentially to make it easier for consumers to recognize and trust these labels. Right, so that was the very brief overview of the Green Claims Directive, a wealth of resources online where you can read more about it. I think if all goes well, it'll come into effect, I think, from 24, 25 onwards, maybe even later than that. But again, I'm no legal expert here. Just want to give you the few headlines. Right, on to the subject matter on avoiding greenwashing. And I would add, and gaining a competitive edge along the way. So what I'm talking about today is not only risk mitigation, it's also a matter of how you can actually position yourself in the marketplace without greenwashing, but creating a competitive edge for your company. But, you know, with all that being said, with the EU Green Claims Directive and all the very, very clever things that Louisiane just walked you through, and all that EcoTree can actually advise you to do, I realize this is a lot to take in, right? And even what I'm about to say, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot of information. So what I essentially want to start with is turning things around and actually say, well, in the wealth of all, in the face of all this complexity and information and danger that you'd risk greenwashing, let me give you 4 reasons not to communicate about sustainability. One is, well, there's already too much information in the first place, and no one gets it. No one understands what you mean. So this is a hypothetical example that I just made up, but I don't think it's unrealistic that a company would say something like this. So in 2023, we've conducted a materiality assessment to identify, survey, and prioritize the blah, 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 right? Which might be true and good, and there might be very good sustainable practice behind the statement. But I don't know about you, but it doesn't really mean anything to me. I can't feel it. I'm not really sensing there is a person behind it. And, you know, if you add to that 91 meters is the average length that your thumb needs to scroll on your phone every single day. So if you put this kind of information in between 91 meters, which is approximately the height of this lesser known statue, I mean, why should you even get started? Why should you even start communicating about these things? No one will notice. Now, secondly, if you do start communicating, no one will probably trust you and you'll be accused of greenwashing anyway, right? So this is some Danish stats saying that 87% of companies in Denmark publicly communicate or disclose information about sustainability. The problem is that only 1/3 of consumers actually trust what they're saying. So clearly we have a trust issue. So why even get started? Now, thirdly, if you do start, you probably won't find any phrases that haven't already been used. They've been used again and again and again and again. So these are real examples from real companies with real websites featuring real sustainability communication on sustainable planet, sustainable future, zero environmental impact, force for good, yada, yada, yada. It's all good. I mean, the sustainable practice behind these kinds of things, but you probably won't find statements or phrases that isn't already in use. And, and the list goes on. You all know these kinds of corporate jargon, right? And fourthly, and lastly, all the best stock photos are already taken in the first place, right? So you've all seen these photos before: green leaves and hearts and human rights marches and of course kids holding the globe and that sort of stuff. So I mean, why even get started? So no one gets it when you communicate about sustainability. No one believes it, and you can't find a phrase or a photo that isn't already taken. And I would add to that, it's the easiest way to avoid greenwashing, by simply not communicating about anything. So imagine that you've gone through a process with EcoTree and you found just your biodiversity project. Just keep silent, say nothing, right? But I would be a pretty bad advisor on the issue if I found that to be true, because I do think it makes sense to communicate about sustainability. Because all evidence suggests it pays off. You create a better position in the marketplace. Potential candidates would consider you a better employer. It increases motivation for employees. And increasingly, sustainability gives a competitive edge in the marketplace. So it pays off like in commercial terms. And the good thing is it pays off for all of us, because the more companies dare to speak about sustainability, the more they inspire the rest of their industry in moving things forward, right? So it pays off for all of us. So with that being said, now that I've given you 4 reasons not to communicate about sustainability, I'll leave you with 4 good principles of how to actually do it. So the first one is that you need to say it your way, because no one else can. You remember the slide with all the corporate jargon that no one really understands? I could have put 20 different companies in the author headline of these statements, and you wouldn't think that they were any different, right? Let me give you an example of someone who says things in a very unique and way that is distinct for their brand. Well, no, sorry. Let me give you another example. So DSB is the Danish National Rail Service, for those of you who don't know, made a statement on their website that it aims to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is a fine thing. They've put out the roadmap and they know how to do it, right? They're well underway. But you could also say it in this way, which is of course a way of sort of mocking a traffic board, a simple way of saying the same thing, but in a way that is unique to the DSB brand. Okay? Number 2, don't be afraid to speak, because progress beats perfection. Often and time again, I see companies rather saying nothing because, well, they fear greenwashing or saying something that's wrong or fucking things up, pardon the French. I mean, but I've never seen a journalist scolding a company for openly disclosing information and showing how they're progressing, the mistakes they've made, etc., etc. So don't be afraid to speak. Let me give you an example. So this is a company called Organic Basics. And this is taken from their last ESG report website. And here you can see that they openly say fuck-ups, because they're optimistic, hopeful about the future, and they've set some ambitious goal, but they know, like any company, there's no perfect company. There's no such thing as just putting together a sustainability strategy, and then it's all fine and dandy, and you won't see hurdles along the way. It doesn't exist. So why not show people that sometimes you fuck up? I've not seen criticism of this approach, like never, and I've been in the business for 10 years. Thirdly, I'd advise you to watch out for the 3 S's, because they are the typical greenwashing pitfalls. And these 3 S's are some of the sort of elements that we've developed in what we call our green screening methodology. So I'll just show you three basic elements to watch out for. So one is stock sustainability. I think I've showed you some examples of it already. So stock sustainability is jargon no one understands, on that no one trusts. So I've just given a bit exaggerated examples here. We're on a purpose-driven, planet-positive journey, which is exaggerating, but you know what I mean, right? No one understands what that means or trust it. Secondly, shop talk, which is overcomplicating things. So in the face of, complex issues and its strategy and it's very complicated and yada, 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 let's just overcomplicate things so we can show people that this is very complex, and which is probably why we're not there yet. So transitioning the polymer compound requires a blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean anything to anyone. And lastly, my favorite is small good news, which is the icing on the business as usual cake. So sometimes companies make small adjustments to how they run their business. They make small, while everything is business as usual. But then when you look at the communication, all of a sudden, this is sort of a milestone. This is a leap in how they do business. Really watch out for that. Have a sort of a holistic understanding of what you're communicating, right? And I wanted to bring in one which I think is, it's a very recent one. And Louisanne, you said in your presentation, you should never claim to be carbon neutral. Well, Apple just did, and I don't think they should. I think this will be criticized. So Apple recently made this small label, which under the Green Claims Directive will probably be illegal in a few years' time. But anyway, look for this logo. It means your Apple Watch is carbon neutral. Well, cool. Well, if you look further into it, it's something to do with 30% recycled materials. It's shipped 50% or more without airplanes. I don't even know what that means. And it's powered by 100% clean electricity. So is that the watch that the power in my watch, or the power that they use to make the watch? I mean, I'm just talking like an average Joe here. It doesn't make sense to me. So if I dig deeper, okay, 100% clean electricity, I read on. Okay, I need to read on even further. This is the report, and this is how they show that. Okay, so it's not the Apple Watch that is carbon neutral. It's any aluminium Apple Watch Series 9 paired with any new sport loop is carbon neutral. Right. So I hope you see what I mean here. I think this is bad practice. This is not best practice. Right. Go check it out on the website. It's fun to read. Anyway, lastly, I hope I'm doing okay on time. So lastly, I would advise you to tell your colleagues about the 3 S's and the no, not the 3 S's, sorry, about the points 1, 2, and 3, and especially number 2. Because we're not the only ones communicating about sustainability, right? So as the number of people working in sustainability in your company increases, and expectedly it will increase in the coming years, and you will invest more in sustainability with partners such as EcoTree or us, if you like, the risk that you say something you shouldn't increases because not all people know all the facts, right? That's simply how it is. So tell your people about the other principles as well. Let me give you an example of something that went horribly wrong. So I don't know if you saw this ad from Mercedes-Benz from a few years back. It was beautifully crafted. So the top level here is the original ad from Mercedes stating nature or nothing, and then putting in the Mercedes logo in very sort of environmental settings that you sort of convey the message, sorry, that the new Mercedes EQ fleet of EVs, I mean, it's nature or nothing, right? So as an average consumer, you'd think, okay, Mercedes-Benz has gone completely sustainable, right? Which is, of course, not the case, but by a long shot, not the case. So in the green organizations were quick to pick up on this and included the Mercedes-Benz in quite other context, as you can see here, right? After which, of course, Mercedes had to distance itself from the campaign and said, well, this was a parent, this was an affiliate, it's nothing to do with HQ, that sort of stuff, right? But point being that Mercedes-Benz probably has got 9,000 communication people working for them and 20,000 lawyers. And even then, this slipped through, which is mind-boggling to me. Anyway, tell your colleagues about the other principles. Cool. I think that was it for me. Am I doing okay on time?
Yeah, perfect. So I'll share my screen again to present the last topic. You should probably, okay. Do you see my screen? Perfect. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Mikkel, for this presentation and your advice on the topic. I'll try to give you the last tips to communicate on, especially project contribution to carbon sinks and biodiversity projects. So your contribution beyond your emissions and reducing your negative impacts. So of course, I again agree with Mikkel and have a solid evidence-based, transparent, coherent message. To give you some further information, again, try to focus on using the right words, and especially when it comes to climate and carbon credits, try to use the word offset or compensation when only you speak about the offset of 10% of your residual emission. So this is linked to the reduction of by 90% of your emissions, and then you have 10% remaining that you can offset. So when you offset these 10%, you can speak about offset and compensation. However, if you go beyond, speak about your contribution to carbon neutrality. So use more the word contribution than offsets. Just a reminder, and then of course try to provide figures and contextualize. So when you speak about carbon and carbon sinks, try to give in any communication the number of tons of CO2 equivalent offset or contributed projects that you've been involved in. Say if it's a nature-based or take-based project, give all the co-benefits and the location of the projects that you have contributed to. Give all the certifications if needed. And of course, try to link it with your climate strategy. So try to link your contribution to projects with your emissions or with your climate strategy. So these are the few figures that you should give in your communication, or that should be easily accessible for your clients or your stakeholders. Finally, don't hesitate to highlight your actions within frameworks. There are many frameworks that may be voluntary, regulatory, that may be labels. We have a lot of KPIs that you can include in these labels or in these frameworks. So you might have TNFD, SBTI, SBTN, etc. And the CSRD coming at the EU level, that requires company to report on many aspects, and especially on carbon and biodiversity actions, and how they depend on carbon and biodiversity, which impacts they have, and what is the strategy they implement to reduce emission and to contribute to biodiversity and carbon sinks projects. So the CSRD asks you a lot of KPIs. Don't hesitate to include these KPIs in your CSRD reports when you do this, if you are concerned by this new regulation. And if you are using voluntary frameworks, don't hesitate to include the KPIs in these frameworks. So make sure that the company you're working with gives you the KPIs that are SBTI, SBTN, TNFD, etc. compliant, or EcoVadis compliant, etc. Yes, that's it, I think. Yeah, and we are pleased to answer your questions if needed. And I don't know if there are any questions. And if not, I hope this was clear, and we will be very happy to speak again with you if you want to reach us on LinkedIn or to send us some emails. And I think there are no questions. So it means it was quite clear. Don't hesitate to reach us, and if you want to go further, if you have further questions, we'll be pleased with Mikkel to answer and to help you in your CSR, climate, sustainable biodiversity strategy, whatever. Thomas, I don't know if you want to say a word as well. No, it's fine.
I think there was a question that I just answered in the chat, which I think was a very good one, from an anonymous attendee who asked, what level of understanding and general knowledge do you think the public actually understands on these topics? Do they understand these nuances? And I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on this as well, Louisiane. But I just put in the chat that the short answer here is no. People don't necessarily understand the innate nuances of biodiversity loss, climate change, or how we solve these big issues. I think people generally understand, the big challenges: plastic waste, climate change, deforestation. You understand these kinds of concepts, but not what companies should be doing to combat them, what governments should be doing to combat them, or even how can I contribute? Because when you talk to a consumer or an average member of the public, you need to also understand that they have a million other things that they also worry about. I need to pick my kids up from school. I need to buy groceries, that sort of, we're only humans. So that's why it's so important when you start communicating about these things, make it relevant. Don't talk to people like they're engineers or that should have an engineering background to understand what you're saying.
I think it's quite actually hard to find the right balance between trying to make everyone understand and speaking sometimes in a too childish way, and using your communication also to educate people and make them aware of what you're doing, but also aware of the context and etc. So I think it's quite hard to find balance, but this is the challenge. And yeah, most of the people actually don't understand everything related to CO2 and biodiversity, blah, blah. It's quite scientific. However, don't speak in a childish way. Try to make them aware, give them some content so that they can improve their knowledge. And actually, I just discovered the question and answer box so that I can, I just found the questions. There was a question also on do we sell tech-based credits? So we don't do this. We are specialized in nature-based solutions. As I was telling, we try to focus on projects that do have co-benefits on biodiversity. We believe that we need to restore, protect nature and biodiversity so that we can sequester carbon as well. And especially restore and protect forests. And we think it's the best way to have an impact on climate change. So we don't sell tech-based credits. Okay. And
there's maybe one last question, Louisiane or Michael, from Francesco on the feed, which is like, try to make it short. Should we communicate differently, whether we communicate internally, publicly? No, depending, not just depending on the audience, but depending on the segment we're addressing.
I don't know if, Mikkel, you have some info on this.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand the question correctly, essentially what you're asking is, should we communicate differently to different target audiences?
Yeah, the question actually is like, how could you differentiate between internal communication, public communication, and customers communication?
Right. Well, essentially, it's a matter of understanding that what are their information needs. I mean, an internal audience would often know things that an external audience doesn't understand or know or needs to know or even can know. So, of course, that's different. And maybe you want to, in an internal communication perspective, instill some confidence or motivation. Maybe you'd want your employees to actually do something. Change behavior or attitudes to what you launch a new strategy, which is something we often do with companies when they've made a new ESG strategy. We need to get employees on board and motivated to actually back this strategy. Whereas in an external perspective, well, to a consumer, well, I think the starting point is the same: understanding their needs, understanding their motivations, their behavior, and what is it that you'd actually want from them. Do you just want to educate them, which is oftentimes not a very good perspective or a starting point for a communication effort. I need you to actually want to do something with me that is relevant for me.
Yes, plus try to know who are these people, who are the people that are working in your company, who are the people that are your, I don't know, customers, and try to understand, are they aware of the things that you're speaking about, what age are they, etc., etc., and this will give you probably some information on how you can communicate with them and reach them in the best way. There was a question, would I recommend a combination between nature-based and tech-based credits? I would say yes, because tech-based credits do not have any co-benefits, as I was saying. However, it is more, it is faster, it sequesters faster, and it has a very permanent storage. So you could have a tiny part of your carbon credits that are based on tech-based, and you can do the most of it on nature-based, so that you can have some credits that you're going to have faster and some credits that you're going to have in the long term. So let me explain a bit more. When you finance carbon credits that are based on nature, most of the time it takes quite a long time because it's nature time. So when you plant a tree, of course, it takes time to sequester carbon. So, but it has a lot of co-benefits, and it's great for nature, and it's great for the people living around the forest so that they can go in it. It's great for the local area, etc. But it takes quite a long time. So you could finance now some nature credits, nature-based credits, because you know it's going to sequester in the long term, but you should finance it now also because of the co-benefits. And in the same time, you can ask yourself, okay, should I also finance some tech-based credits because I want credits very, very fast, and I want to have sequestered carbon very, very fast. So you could have both of these. However, try to consider that when you finance a tech-based project, of course, it's going to sequester carbon, but it also had required a lot of materials that do have emitted some emissions. So we emit emissions, and to build a machine that is going to sequester carbon. So this is sometimes a bit tricky.
Yeah, and I would, if you go for a tech-based solution, I'm just to build on that, Louisiane, I'd as a minimum ask to see, or I mean, have an understanding of the full LCA of that credit, right? Yeah. Because as you directly point out, I mean, it's not free to capture carbon and store it geologically or whatever you want to do, but it is a faster way, it's a faster route right now. It's also a more expensive one as it is right now, right? Because there's no real global CCS infrastructure yet, right?
Yep.
All right, I think the time is out for today. So again, a warm thank you, Louisiane and Mikkel, for those very valuable inputs. I hope you all had valuable takeaways from this session. Feel free to reach out, obviously, right, to pursue the discussion. We are happy to help and happy to assist you further. Again, you get a wrap-up message with the link to the replay of this session, and also possibly additional sources, so you can deep dive in this, again, quite crucial topic. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We wish you all a good day, and looking forward to hearing from you soon. Cheers and bye-bye. Have a good day.